In the heat of noon, the Rock sat quietly on a park bench, but to a racist cop, he was just another black man to humiliate. With a cruel smirk, the officer shoved him face first into a pothole filled with filthy water, laughing as the crowd gasped and phones began to record. But when the Rock rose, dripping and furious, the street itself seemed to tremble. What followed was not just a fight, it was a reckoning. And before the day ended, the cop who forced him down was on his knees, humiliated before the world. Subscribe and like this video to see how the story unfolds. The sun was merciless that day, pouring heat onto the cracked pavement like fire. The Rock walked down Main Street wearing a plain black t-shirt that clung to his broad chest, dark jeans and boots, heavy enough to rattle the sidewalk with each step. His presence drew eyes, not just because of his sheer size, but because of the aura that seemed to follow him. Calm, grounded, unshakable. He had no entourage, no flashing cameras, no Hollywood spotlight trailing him, just a man out for a quiet walk. Some nodded respectfully as he passed. A few kids whispered to each other, tugging their parents' arms, too shy to approach. But then the air shifted. A patrol car rolled up, its engine growling, its siren cutting the hum of traffic for a split second before going silent. The driver's door swung open and out stepped a cop with a swagger that screamed arrogance. His uniform was crisp, but the sneer on his face said more than the badge ever could. The man wasn't here to keep order. He was here to make a point. "Hey!" the cop barked, voice loud enough to turn heads up and down the block. "What's a big guy like you doing strutting around here like you own the place?" The Rock slowed, his eyes narrowing behind dark sunglasses. "Just walking," he said evenly, his voice calm, a rumble under the summer heat. The cop smirked, stepping closer, his hand resting casually on the butt of his baton. "Walking, huh? Looks more like loitering to me." People on the sidewalk froze, sensing trouble. Phones started to lift discreetly. The Rock didn't flinch. "It's a public street." But the cop wanted more. His eyes burned with something darker, resentment, hate, the kind that doesn't need a reason. He shoved his chest forward until he stood nose to chest with the larger man. "You think being big makes you special, makes you untouchable?" The Rock's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The silence only fueled the cop's rage. With a sudden shove, the officer slammed both hands into the Rock's chest. The giant stumbled back, not from lack of strength, but from the sheer surprise of it. His boots scraped the asphalt, his balance regained in an instant. But the officer wasn't finished. "On the ground!" he barked, grabbing the Rock by the shoulder and ramming his knee into the back of his legs. Gasps erupted from the bystanders. A woman cried out, "Stop!" Another man shouted, "Hey, that's uncalled for!" But before anyone could act, the cop's hand clamped down on the back of the Rock's head. With a cruel laugh, he shoved forward, slamming his face into a pothole filled with filthy rainwater and oil. The splash was sickening. Black water sprayed across the pavement, dripping down the cop's boots, staining the Rock's shirt. "Not so tough now, are you?" the cop sneered, pressing harder, holding him down. The crowd erupted, some screaming in horror, others yelling for the cop to stop. Phones were everywhere now, recording every filthy second. The Rock's palms pressed against the pavement, his massive arms trembling with restrained power. His head stayed submerged for one long, humiliating moment. But deep inside, something shifted. The fury began to rise, and when the Rock rose, the entire street would never forget what followed. The water was foul, an oily mix of rain, gasoline, cigarette butts, and city grime that stung the nostrils. The cop pressed harder, laughing, as bubbles rippled up around his boots. The image was brutal. The Rock, the world's toughest figure, forced face first into the pavement like he was just another man to bully. The crowd erupted. "Get off him!" someone screamed. "This is abuse!" another shouted. A kid clutched his mother's arm, whispering, "Why are they doing this to him?" But the cop didn't care. His sneer grew wider, his grip tighter. He wanted the humiliation to be permanent. To him, it wasn't just about forcing a man down, it was about making a statement. No one's too big for me to break. The Rock's lungs burned, his fists pressed against the pavement, arms flexing, veins bulging, body like a coiled spring. And then, slowly, deliberately, he began to rise. The cop frowned. His hands slipped against the giant's soaked head as the Rock's frame lifted inch by inch, water cascading off him, his shoulders pushed higher, his spine straightening like a steel beam. When his face finally emerged from the pothole, the street went silent. Filthy water streamed down his jaw, dripping off his nose, soaking into his shirt. But it wasn't the sight of him drenched that froze the crowd. It was his expression. His sunglasses were gone, flung into the water, his eyes, now bare, burned with a fury so raw, so cold, that even the boldest bystander felt a shiver. His jaw was clenched, his nostrils flaring with every deep breath. His body was soaked and stained, but his presence had never looked more terrifying. The cop stumbled back a step, his laugh faltering. "Stay down," he barked, raising his baton. But the words had no weight now. The Rock planted one hand on the pavement and rose to his full height, towering over the officer. He stood, dripping, his shirt clinging to every cut of his chest, the water trailing down his arms like battle scars. The crowd erupted again, this time not in fear, but in awe. "Oh my God!" someone whispered into their phone live stream. "He's not even fazed." "Look at him." The Rock's voice cut through the chaos like thunder. "You put me in the dirt." "You thought you could bury me." He took a deliberate step forward, water dripping from his boots. "But you just woke me up." The cop swung his baton, aiming for the Rock's ribs. The Rock's hand shot out, catching the blow mid-swing. The baton cracked against his palm, but his grip was iron. With one squeeze, wood splintered, fragments snapping into the air. The officer's eyes went wide. The Rock tossed the broken baton to the ground, the sound sharp against the silence. He leaned closer, his voice low but so powerful it carried across the street. "You wanted me on my knees." "Now I'm standing, and you," he jabbed a finger into the officer's chest, "are about to regret every second of this." The crowd erupted in chants. "Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!" Phones shook as people screamed into their live streams. "This is insane!" He broke the baton like it was nothing. The officer backpedaled, but his pride wouldn't let him run. He drew his taser, electricity crackling, pointing it at the Rock's chest. "Back down!" he shouted, his voice cracking, "or I'll drop you again!" The Rock took another step closer, his eyes burning, his fists tightening at his sides. "You couldn't drop me if you had the whole world behind you." The tension was thick enough to choke the air. The crowd leaned forward, their chants growing louder, their phones capturing every angle. And the officer, sweat dripping, taser trembling, realized he was staring not at a victim, but at the storm he had unleashed. The taser crackled, its blue arcs of electricity snapping in the daylight, but the Rock didn't flinch. He stood, dripping, his massive frame radiating fury and restraint in equal measure. The cop's smug confidence had evaporated, leaving only desperation in his trembling hands. The crowd was silent for a heartbeat. Then one brave voice shouted, "Don't back down, Rock!" Another joined in, then another, until the square echoed with a chant that rolled like thunder. "Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!" The cop snarled, trying to drown the noise. "Shut up!" he screamed at the bystanders, taser still aimed at the Rock. "Everybody shut up or you're next." But his threats only made the chant louder. The Rock's gaze never left him. His voice was low, steady, yet it carried across the street like a drumbeat. "You shoved my face in the dirt." "You wanted me humiliated. You wanted me broken." He took a step forward, water still dripping down his shirt. "Now, I'm going to show you what broken really looks like." The cop fired the taser. Wires zipped through the air, striking the Rock's chest with a crack. Electricity surged, the smell of ozone filling the street. The crowd gasped. Several screamed in horror. But the Rock didn't fall. His body jerked slightly, muscles tightening, but his eyes stayed locked on the officer. His jaw clenched, his fists trembled, and then, with a guttural roar, he ripped the wires from his chest and tossed them aside. The taser fizzled out in the cop's hand, powerless. The crowd erupted like a volcano, their chant now a roar that shook the city block. "Rock! Rock! Rock!" Panic flashed across the officer's face. He dropped the taser and drew his baton, but the Rock was already moving. He lunged forward, closing the distance in a single stride. His massive hand clamped around the cop's wrist, squeezing, until the man yelped in pain and dropped the weapon. With a shove, the Rock sent the baton clattering across the pavement. "You've got nothing left," the Rock growled, towering over him. "No badge, no weapon, no power." The cop stumbled back, tripping over his own feet, his back smacking against the hood of his cruiser. His breath came in ragged gasps, his arrogance shattered. But his pride still burned. He wasn't going to let himself be embarrassed in front of a crowd that was filming every second. He yanked his radio from his belt and screamed into it. "Officer down! Send backup now, all units! Backup now!" The Rock stood still, his eyes narrowing. Around them the crowd bristled, voices rising in anger. A woman shouted, "Back up! You assaulted him!" Another yelled, "We saw everything!" "It's all on camera." But sirens already wailed in the distance. The sound grew louder, closer, filling the air with dread. The cop smirked weakly, blood trickling from his lip. "You're finished. They'll be here any second." "You can't fight all of us." The Rock leaned closer, his shadows swallowing the man whole. His voice dropped to a whisper that made the officer's blood run cold. "Watch me!" The sirens screeched closer, tires squealed. 3 patrol cars whipped around the corner, lights flashing, doors flying open. More officers poured into the street, guns drawn, voices shouting. "Step away from the officer! Hands on your head! Get on the ground!" The crowd erupted in outrage, shouting over each other. "He's the victim! We saw it! Leave him alone!" The Rock didn't move. His chest rose steady, his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes flicked across the line of officers. He could feel the crowd's energy behind him, surging like a wave. He raised his voice, calm but thunderous. "You think I'll kneel again? You'll have to break me first." The street went silent for a heartbeat. Then the chant erupted louder than ever, drowning out the sirens, the commands, everything. "Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!" The sirens cut off as 3 patrol cars screeched to a halt, boxing in the street from both ends. Doors slammed, boots pounded, and a swarm of officers poured out, 10, maybe 15, all with their hands already on their weapons. The air bristled with danger, the crowd's voices rising into a frantic mix of outrage and fear. The first cop, the one who had shoved the Rock into the pothole, stood shakily, relief flickering across his face. Backup had arrived. He sneered again, though sweat dripped down his temple. "You're done now, big man. You think you can take me, but you can't take all of us." The Rock stood still, water still dripping from his shirt, steam almost rising from his broad shoulders under the midday sun. His voice rumbled low, steady, but it carried to every ear in the block. "You couldn't break me with your hands. You couldn't break me with your baton. You shoved me into the dirt, and I'm still standing." He took one step forward, and the line of fresh officers instinctively faltered. "You really think more of you will change that?" The lead backup officer barked, "On your knees! Hands behind your head." The crowd booed, shouting over him. "We saw what happened." He didn't do anything. "It's all on camera." Phones shot higher, live streams buzzing with comments pouring in from thousands watching. But the cops weren't listening. They raised their batons, forming a line as their commander barked again, "Take him down!" The Rock didn't wait. He surged forward like a battering ram, his boots pounding the pavement. The first baton swung down at his head. He caught it mid-swing, wrenched it free, and hurled the officer backward with a single shove. The second lunged, but the Rock spun, his elbows smashing into the man's chest plate, sending him crashing onto the hood of a cruiser. Metal buckled under the impact, the windshield spiderwebbing with cracks. The crowd gasped, then roared, "Rock! Rock! Rock!" 2 officers came at him from both sides. The Rock ducked low, his massive arms shooting out. He grabbed them both by the vests, lifting them off their feet as easily as groceries. With a roar, he swung them together, their helmets clashing with a sickening crack before tossing them aside. The racist cop who had started it all scrambled behind his allies, pointing frantically, "Get him! He's just one man," but his voice shook. And the truth was written all over his face. He didn't believe it anymore. The Rock advanced again, sweat and filthy water dripping down his frame. You put me in the pavement once. Try again. See what happens. 3 more officers charged in desperation, shields raised. The Rock barreled forward, his fists hammering like sledgehammers. One shield shattered on impact, pieces clattering to the ground. The second officer was flung aside with a backhand so powerful he rolled across the asphalt. The third found himself lifted by the collar and slammed against the side of his own patrol car, the air knocked clean from his lungs. The people erupted, their chant rising to the heavens. Stand tall, stand tall, stand tall. In minutes, the street was chaos. Officers groaned on the pavement, their batons scattered, their shields broken. The Rock stood in the center of the storm, unyielding, towering above the wreckage. His chest heaved, but his gaze was sharp, locked on the one man who hadn't been touched, the racist cop who had started it all. The officer's sneer was gone now. His face was pale, his knees trembling as he stumbled back. "You're finished," he stammered. "You can't. This isn't—" The Rock's voice cut him off like thunder. "You put me in the dirt. You shoved my face into filth, but I got back up." He pointed straight at the man, his voice booming so loud it echoed off the buildings. "Now the world's watching you drown in your own shame." The crowd screamed, their chant shaking the air. "Shame! Shame! Shame!" The racist cop's lip trembled. He tried to step back, but there was nowhere left to run. And the Rock was coming for him. The street was chaos, sirens still blaring, batons scattered, cruisers dented, shields cracked in half. Officers groaned on the asphalt, clutching ribs and bruised limbs. But the storm hadn't ended. At the center of it all stood the Rock, soaked in filthy water, chest heaving, eyes locked on one man, the man who started it all. The racist cop. He stood frozen a few yards away, his smirk long gone, replaced by a look of pure disbelief. His hands trembled as he backed up against the hood of his cruiser, his voice cracked as he tried to regain control. You assaulted officers! You'll go to prison for this." But his words fell flat. The crowd's roar drowned him out. The chant thundered, unified, relentless. "Stand tall, stand tall, stand tall." Phones shook in hands, live streams buzzing. People around the world were watching as the hunter became the hunted. The Rock stepped forward. Each footfall was deliberate, heavy, echoing like the beat of war drums. His massive frame loomed larger with every step, water dripping from his clothes, steam almost rising from his skin under the blazing sun. "You shoved me into filth," he said, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You put my head in the dirt and thought it made you strong." The cop's lips trembled. I was just doing my job." The Rock's eyes narrowed. "Your job is to protect, but you chose to humiliate. You chose hate. And now—" He pointed at the man's trembling knees. "Look at you." The crowd erupted in cheers, the chant morphing into a new rhythm. "Coward! Coward! Coward!" The officer shook his head, trying to block the noise. "Shut up! All of you shut up!" His voice cracked, drowned in the roar of the people. The Rock closed the distance, standing just inches away now. The cop had to tilt his head up to look into his eyes, and it made him shrink even more. "You thought the badge made you powerful," the Rock growled. "But power isn't pushing someone down. Power is standing back up after you've been buried." He leaned closer, his voice dropping into a whisper that still carried to every microphone and phone recording. "And I will never stay down." The cop's face twisted in desperation. In a last act of pride, he lunged forward, fists swinging clumsily. The Rock caught his punch mid-air. The cop froze, his arm trapped like it had been caught in an iron vice. The Rock's grip tightened until the man whimpered. With a roar, the Rock yanked him forward, lifted him clear off the ground, and slammed him down onto the hood of his own cruiser. Metal crumpled under the impact, the sound reverberating like thunder. The crowd went wild, their chant exploding back into, "Rock! Rock! Rock!" The cop gasped, his body sprawled across the dented hood, his pride shattered. He tried to scramble, but the Rock's massive hand pressed him down, pinning him easily. The Rock raised his voice, booming across the block. "This is what happens when you abuse your badge, when you think fear is strength. You get broken in front of the world.
The crowd erupted, their chant rolling like a tidal wave. Stand tall! Stand tall! The Rock released the officer, letting him slump against the car, humiliated and gasping for air. But he wasn't finished.
He turned to the crowd, his chest heaving, his arms spread wide as if to embrace them all. They thought they could shove me down, but I stood back up. And every one of you, every person who's ever been pushed, ever been humiliated, remember this. You don't stay down. You rise. You stand tall. The chant shook the air, the buildings, the very ground under their feet.
And the officer, broken on the hood of his cruiser, realized his career, his pride, his reputation. It was all over.
The racist cop slumped against the hood of his cruiser, humiliated, his face twisted in rage and shame. The crowd's chants rattled the air, shaking him to his core. Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall! Every phone in the crowd was aimed at him. Every second of his downfall was being streamed to millions. And he knew it. His hand fumbled at his radio, fingers trembling as he pressed the button. Dispatch, officer in distress. Send everything you've got. Repeat, everything. This is an emergency. The Rock stood over him, calm and unshaken, his chest rising and falling like a mountain after a storm. He tilted his head, voice steady, deep as thunder. You're not calling for help. You're calling for more humiliation. Sirens wailed again, louder this time, growing like a swarm. From both ends of the street, convoys of police vans and armoured vehicles rolled in. Tires screeched, doors slammed, and within seconds the entire block swarmed with dozens of officers in heavy riot gear, helmets, shields, batons, gas masks.
The crowd gasped. Some screamed in fear. Parents pushed their children back, shielding them with their arms.
But not one phone lowered. The chant faltered for a heartbeat, replaced by nervous whispers. That's too many. Even he can't fight all of them.
The racist cop sneered weakly, wiping blood from his lip. Let's see you stand tall now.
The Rock slowly turned, his gaze sweeping across the riot line. 40, maybe 50 officers lined the block, their shields gleaming under the sun, their weapons raised. He planted his feet, straightened his spine, and raised his chin. His voice carried over the fear, steady and unbreakable. You brought an army to finish what you started. But you forgot one thing.
He slammed his fist against his chest, the sound echoing.
I don't kneel. The riot commander barked through a megaphone. Disperse immediately, or force will be used. The crowd shouted back instantly. We saw it all. He's the victim. It's on camera. Leave him alone.
But the order was already given. The wall of shields advanced. The Rock's fists clenched at his sides. He turned to the people behind him, their faces wide with fear. Stay back! This isn't your fight. But the crowd shouted in unison, We're with you! And the chant began again, louder, stronger. Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!
The officers pushed forward, their shields slamming like a drumbeat, their batons tapping against them in rhythm. The line moved like a machine trying to crush everything in its path, but the Rock moved first. He charged forward like a freight train, his fist smashed into the first shield, splintering it with a crack. The officer behind it was flung backward, crashing into his comrades. Another baton swung for his head. He ducked, his massive arm lashing out to grab the officer by the vest. With one heave, he lifted him clean off the ground and hurled him into the advancing line, bodies toppling like dominoes. Gas canisters hissed, smoke flooding the street. The crowd coughed, eyes watering, but through the haze the Rock's silhouette loomed like a titan. He burst through the smoke, grabbing two shields and ripping them apart like paper. His roar thundered over the chaos. You can't bury me!
Rubber bullets fired, cracking against his chest and arms. He winced but didn't fall. His massive hand shot out, seizing a rifle midair, snapping it across his knee before tossing the pieces aside. The crowd shrieked in disbelief.
He broke it! He broke it in half. The riot line faltered, fear flickering in their eyes. Their formation crumbled as the Rock ploughed through them, his fists swinging, his body moving with the unstoppable force of a storm. Officers fell one by one, batons clattering, shields shattering, their screams drowned by the roar of the people. At the edge of the chaos, the racist cop's smirk vanished. His eyes darted from his broken men back to the Rock, who stood unyielding in the smoke, his chest heaving, his fists dripping with sweat and grime. You're not human," the officer whispered, backing away.
The Rock pointed at him, his voice booming, his rage controlled but burning bright.
"No, I'm just a man who refused to stay down. That's what terrifies you." The crowd's chant erupted again, deafening now. "Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!" And, for the first time in his life, the racist cop realized he was the one drowning, not the Rock. The riot line was shattered. Shields lay split in half, batons scattered, and armored officers groaned on the asphalt, clutching their ribs and helmets. The smoke from gas canisters drifted upward, curling like ghosts into the noon sun. And in the middle of the wreckage, the Rock stood. Soaked, bruised, steam rising from his skin, unbroken. The chant rolled through the crowd like thunder over the ocean. "Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!"
Every phone in the crowd pointed at him. Millions were watching live across the world. The cameras had caught everything, his humiliation, his rise, his storm, and now they would catch the final act.
Because the man who started it all, the racist cop, was still there. The officer stumbled back, his chest heaving, his lips trembling. His arrogance had drained away, leaving behind only panic. He looked around desperately, but there was no line left to hide behind, no shields, no squad to protect him. Every ally he had brought lay broken in the street, and the Rock was walking toward him. Each step echoed heavy against the pavement.
The cop raised his hands. "Stay back! I swear, stay back!" His voice cracked, brittle.
The Rock didn't stop. His voice was calm, dangerous. "You shoved me into filth. You thought that would bury me. You thought humiliation would make me small." He took another step. The officer pressed against the wall of his cruiser, nowhere left to run. "But all you did," the Rock's eyes narrowed, "was make me rise higher." The crowd screamed, the chant surging louder. Phones zoomed in, desperate to catch every second of the moment. The officer's hand darted to his sidearm. His fingers shook as he yanked his pistol free, pointing it directly at the Rock's chest. The gun trembled in his grip, the barrel wavering as sweat poured down his face. The crowd gasped, some screamed, but the Rock didn't flinch. He stepped closer until the barrel pressed against his chest. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper.
"You think this makes you strong?"
The officer's lips trembled. "Don't make me." The Rock's hand shot out, lightning fast, seizing the pistol. With one crushing twist, he bent the weapon at the frame, the steel groaning before snapping in half. He tossed the broken pieces to the pavement.
The officer froze in shock, his body trembling like a leaf.
The Rock grabbed him by the vest, yanking him forward until their faces were inches apart. His voice boomed so loud it shook the windows of the buildings. "You wanted the world to see me kneel. Now the world will see you."
With a savage shove, he forced the cop down. The man hit his knees hard against the pavement, the sound sharp, final.
The crowd exploded, their chant turning into a roar that rattled the heavens. "On your knees! On your knees! On your knees!"
Phones shook wildly. Live streams flooded with comments.
He made him kneel. Poetic justice. This is history being made. The officer's face crumpled, tears mixing with sweat. He tried to rise, but the Rock's massive hand pressed against his shoulder, keeping him down with ease. "This is what humiliation feels like," the Rock growled, his voice cutting like steel. "This is what the world will remember. Not me in the dirt, not me in the filth, but you on your knees before the truth." The crowd roared, their chant deafening. "Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!" The officer whimpered, broken in front of the cameras, his power gone, his career destroyed, his pride shattered. And the Rock stood above him, towering, unshaken, the living image of defiance. The racist cop knelt on the pavement, humiliated, trembling under the weight of 1,000 eyes. His broken pistol lay in 2 pieces at his side. His vest was clutched tight in the Rock's hand, keeping him pinned. The crowd was a storm, shouting, chanting, crying, laughing, all of it at once. Phones filmed from every angle, live-stream comments exploding across the world. This is it, history. The cop's on his knees. The Rock just flipped the script.
The Rock stood tall above him, his massive frame glistening with sweat and filth, his chest heaving, but his presence unbroken. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his arm high, and silence fell like a blanket over the chaos.
Even the helicopters circling above seemed to hover quieter. His voice rolled deep, steady, and powerful enough to cut through the silence like thunder. They tried to put me down. They shoved me into filth, pressed me into the ground, tried to humiliate me in front of the world. He pointed down at the officer still on his knees, his voice rising. And look who kneels now.
The crowd exploded, the chant erupting with unstoppable force.
Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall! The Rock's jaw tightened as he raised his voice again, his words vibrating through the very air.
They thought strength was about guns, about badges, about shoving people into the dirt. But strength isn't humiliation. Strength isn't abuse. He slammed his fist against his chest, the sound booming. Strength is rising back up when the world tries to bury you. Strength is standing tall when others want you broken.
The crowd roared, their chant shaking windows. Stand tall! Stand tall! People climbed lampposts, waving their phones, recording the moment. News anchors shouted into their microphones, nearly drowned out by the chant. But the Rock wasn't done. His eyes swept across the crowd, his voice steady but sharp, cutting through the noise. You've all been there. Someone trying to shove you down, someone trying to make you feel small. And when they did, you had 2 choices. Stay down or rise back up. He pointed to the ground where the officer knelt, broken and humiliated. Don't ever let anyone put you here. Not a bully, not a boss, not a badge. You stand tall. You stand for yourself. You stand for your family. You stand for the truth. The crowd screamed, the chant now deafening. Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall! Tears streamed down faces. Strangers hugged each other. Kids sat on their parents' shoulders, their tiny fists pumping in the air as they shouted the chant. Phones streamed live around the world, comments flooding in faster than anyone could read. This isn't just a fight, it's a revolution. Chills. Literal chills.
This man just started a movement. The Rock turned back to the officer one last time. His voice dropped to a low growl, deadly calm.
You thought you could drown me in dirt? You thought you could bury me? But all you did was make me stronger. And now the world sees you for what you are. Weak. The cop whimpered, his head lowering in shame. The Rock released his vest and stepped back. The man collapsed fully to his knees, broken and defeated. The Rock raised both arms high above the sea of people, his voice booming one final time. I will never kneel, and neither should you. Stand tall.
The chant became an earthquake. The pavement shook under the roar. Helicopter mics rattled from the sheer volume of human voices united as one.
Stand tall, stand tall, stand tall. And in that moment, it was no longer about one man in the dirt.
It was about millions.
By the time dusk fell, the city was no longer the same. The chants of stand tall hadn't ended when the crowd dispersed. They followed people into their cars, their homes, their neighborhoods. The phrase was on every lip, shouted from rooftops, scribbled in chalk on sidewalks, painted hastily onto walls, and everywhere screens replayed the same image. The Rock, dripping with filthy water, towering over a kneeling cop. The footage exploded across the internet, replayed in slow motion, remixed with music, shared in every language. News anchors ran it on a loop. Late-night comedians cracked jokes about it. Kids made TikToks copying The Rock's stance, fists clenched, eyes burning with defiance. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement. By morning, murals began to appear on city walls, spray-painted images of The Rock standing tall with the words, "Never kneel" in bold letters underneath. Protesters carried signs with his silhouette. In schools, kids stood with their chins high and whispered, "Stand tall" to each other when teachers weren't looking. Clips of his speech flooded classrooms, gyms, offices. Fighters analyzed his composure, his balance, his raw presence. Motivational speakers quoted him. Politicians tried to twist his words to their causes, but the people didn't need them. The Rock's voice had already transcended.
Meanwhile, the police department was in crisis.
The racist cop's name was plastered across headlines, not as an officer, but as the man humiliated before the world. Editorials tore apart his record, exposing past complaints, old abuses swept under the rug. The department tried to contain the fallout, but the footage was undeniable. One news anchor put it bluntly. They tried to make The Rock kneel, but all they managed to do was bring the system itself to its knees. For The Rock, though, life hadn't changed in the way people expected. He didn't throw a victory party. He didn't run to cameras to celebrate. He went back to training, back to his family, back to the quiet strength that had always guided him. But everywhere he went, people stopped him. At the grocery store, strangers gripped his hand and whispered, "Thank you." In gyms, young men and women mimicked his stance, asking him to correct their posture. At airports, entire crowds chanted, "Stand tall, Mateen," when he walked by. The Rock accepted it all with a steady nod, but inside he knew something bigger was stirring. 1 week later, the city square where it had all begun transformed into something unrecognizable. The pothole where his head had been shoved? People had filled it with flowers. Around it, candles flickered, photos lined the curb, signs leaned against the fountain reading, "We stand with you." The Rock returned quietly, not to be worshipped, but to honor the moment. He stood at the edge of the pothole, staring down at the flowers floating on the murky water, and breathed deeply. A little girl approached, holding her father's hand. She tugged at the Rock's jeans until he looked down. She smiled shyly, her small voice trembling. They told you to kneel, but you didn't."
The Rock bent to one knee, lowering his massive frame until he was eye level with her. His voice softened. "Sometimes you kneel to no one. Not when it's wrong. Not when it's meant to break you." The girl nodded, her smile spreading. She raised her tiny fist in the air. "Stand tall."
The Rock smiled back and tapped her fist with his own. "That's right." The crowd that had gathered broke into applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. That night, a helicopter news camera caught something astonishing. Thousands of people flooding into the square, lighting candles, chanting the words that had become their anthem. "Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!" The chant echoed through the city streets, bouncing off buildings, rattling windows, shaking the air until it became impossible to ignore. The Rock stood at the edge of the crowd, silent, watching. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just his fight anymore. It belonged to everyone. The city had never seen anything like it. Within days, the square where the Rock had been shoved into filthy water transformed into a living monument. Murals stretched across entire buildings, candles burned at night, and the chant, "Stand tall," echoed daily like church bells. What began as a spark was now a wildfire. Students marched from schools carrying banners with the Rock's silhouette. Workers painted "Never kneel" on cardboard and waved them from construction sites. Parents hoisted their kids onto their shoulders, teaching them the chant as if it were their birthright. And all the while, the footage replayed endlessly. The Rock, drenched, face shoved into filth, the Rock rising, fists clenched, the Rock forcing the officer onto his knees. It had become more than a story, it was a parable, but with every chant, the city's authorities grew more desperate. Politicians called emergency meetings demanding the protests stop. Police chiefs fumbled through press conferences, sweating under harsh lights, trying to distance themselves from the viral disgrace. And then news broke.
The racist cop, suspended and disgraced, filed a lawsuit. His words dripped with venom. "I was the victim of assault. That man is dangerous. He incited violence against law enforcement." The crowd's outrage was instant. Within hours, thousands gathered again at the square. Signs blazed with fury. The only victim was justice.
You can't sue the truth?
We saw it all.
The city boiled, ready to erupt. The Rock had stayed quiet since the incident. He trained, ate meals with his family, and carried on as he always had. But the pressure mounted with every chant, every news story, every person begging him to speak again. And so on the seventh night he returned to the square. When he arrived, tens of thousands were already there. They parted for him like water, their chants fading into silence as he stepped onto the cracked pavement where the pothole had once swallowed his pride. He stood tall, the crowd holding its breath. His voice, when it came, rumbled like a storm over the city. They tried to bury me. You saw it. You saw them press me into the dirt, into the filth. They wanted to break me. They wanted me on my knees. He paused, sweeping his gaze over the sea of faces young and old, black and white, every walk of life standing shoulder to shoulder. But I rose, I stood. And now you stand too. The crowd erupted, the chant reborn. Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall! The Rock raised his arm, and silence fell again. They want to make me the villain. They want to erase what you saw, but this movement is bigger than me. It's not about the Rock. It's about you. Every one of you who's ever been shoved down, humiliated, broken, this is your moment to rise.
The crowd thundered with cheers, tears streaking down faces. Strangers hugged each other, fists pumping in rhythm.
The Rock's voice deepened, sharp as steel. You can suspend me, you can sue me, you can smear my name, but you can't erase the truth. The truth is simple. We do not kneel to hate. We do not kneel to humiliation. We stand tall.
The square erupted, a wave of voices so loud it shook the air like thunder.
Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall! Helicopters hovered above, broadcasting the chant live across the world. News anchors whispered into microphones, awestruck.
This wasn't a protest anymore.
It was a revolution. At the edge of the crowd, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing. What about the lawsuit? What if they arrest you? Are you afraid? The Rock turned his head, his eyes blazing.
Afraid? I was shoved face first into filth and I rose again. There is nothing left to fear.
The chant roared, drowning out the questions.
And for the first time, the city's leaders realized this wasn't something they could contain with lawsuits, threats, or riot gear. The Rock had become untouchable, not because of his fists, but because he had become the voice of the people.
As night fell, the square glowed with candlelight, chants echoing through the dark like an endless heartbeat. And high above, painted in fresh spray paint on the side of City Hall itself, were 3 words in bold letters that no one dared erase. Stand tall! The courthouse was never meant to hold so many people. By sunrise, the steps were already packed with protesters, their signs waving like a sea of defiance. Stand tall! Never kneel. Justice for all. The chant rolled through the crowd like a living heartbeat, echoing through the marble columns until the building itself seemed to vibrate. Inside, the air was suffocating. The racist cop sat at the plaintiff's table, his suit a size too big, his face pale and haggard. His lawyers whispered furiously, shuffling papers, their eyes darting nervously to the packed gallery. Every seat was filled. Reporters jostled for space, cameras flashing, pencils scratching against pads. And then the Rock walked in. He wasn't dressed for spectacle, no suit, no tie. Just a simple black shirt, dark jeans, boots that thudded against the floor with each step. Yet the room shifted the instant he appeared. Conversations died, pens stopped moving, every head turned. He didn't have to speak. His presence alone filled the chamber like a storm cloud rolling in. The judge banged the gavel, trying to keep order. This is a court of law, not a stadium. If I hear one chant, one cheer, I will clear this gallery.
But outside, the chants kept rolling, thundering through the streets. Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!
The Rock sat calmly at the defendant's table, his massive frame barely fitting in the wooden chair. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering, They don't stand a chance. The world saw everything. The Rock's jaw tightened. His voice was low but steady. The truth doesn't need help. It speaks for itself. The proceedings began. The cop's lawyer stood, his voice loud, theatrical. My client is the victim of an assault. This so-called hero, this entertainer, viciously attacked a man of the law and incited a riot that endangered lives. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, some hissing, others scoffing. The lawyer paced, gesturing dramatically. This wasn't justice. This wasn't self-defense. This was spectacle. My client was humiliated in front of millions, his career destroyed, his life endangered, all because one man decided to play God in the streets. He slammed his hand on the table for emphasis. We are here for accountability. We are here for justice. The Rock sat still, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the lawyer, with the intensity of a predator waiting to strike. Then it was his turn. The Rock rose slowly, towering over everyone in the room. Even the judge seemed to shrink beneath his presence. He placed both hands on the table, leaned forward, and spoke. Justice? His voice rumbled like distant thunder. You call what happened justice? He straightened, his broad chest filling the room. You shoved my face into filth. You pressed me into the ground like I was less than human. You laughed while you did it. And now you stand here crying about humiliation? You humiliated yourself the moment you chose hate over duty. The gallery erupted, gasps mixing with cheers before the judge's gavel hammered desperately. Order! Order! But the tide couldn't be stopped. Outside, the crowd's chant bled through the windows, shaking the glass. Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall! The Rock's voice cut through it all. I didn't start this fight, but I finished it. And I'll finish it again if I have to. Not because I'm looking for trouble, but because no man, no badge, no system has the right to shove anyone into the dirt. The judge finally silenced the room, but the damage was done. The Rock's words spread like fire through the crowd outside, through reporters' phones, through live streams already buzzing across the globe. The cop's lawyer stammered, trying to regain control. He's grandstanding. This isn't a speech, it's intimidation.
The Rock's attorneys smirked. That wasn't intimidation. That was truth.
The trial adjourned for the day, but the courthouse steps became a battleground. On one side, the cop was escorted out by security, jeered at by the crowd. His face twisted in anger, he shouted back, You'll all regret this. You'll regret siding with him.
On the other side, the Rock emerged slowly, calmly. The moment he stepped through the doors, the chant exploded like an earthquake. Stand tall! Stand tall! The air shook with it. Signs waved. Tears streamed down faces. The Rock raised a single fist into the air, his silhouette captured against the setting sun. The chant reached a crescendo so loud, the city itself seemed to tremble.
And in that moment, it was clear. No courtroom, no lawsuit, no smear campaign could undo what had already been written into history. The Rock had become more than a man. He was a symbol. The courthouse was overflowing. Cameras lined the aisles. The gallery was standing room only. And outside, the chant of stand tall, rattled every window pane. It was the final day, the verdict. The racist cop sat slouched at his table, his tie crooked, sweat staining his collar. His lawyers whispered frantically, but their words slid off him. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. Days of being shredded by the press, mocked online, and booed by crowds had hollowed him out. Across the room, the Rock sat steady and unshaken. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't angry, he was simply there, arms folded across his massive chest, his calm presence filling the chamber. The judge entered, gavel cracking down. This court is now in session. Jury, have you reached a verdict?
The foreman stood, paper in hand, voice firm. We have, Your Honor.
The room went still. Even the crowd outside seemed to quiet, sensing the gravity of the moment. In the matter of the plaintiff versus Dwayne Johnson, the foreman began, we find in favor of the defendant. The room erupted. Gasps, cheers, shouts. Reporters scrambled for their phones, broadcasting the words instantly. The racist cop's face crumpled, his hands trembling as he slammed his fist against the table. "This is rigged!" "It's all rigged," he screamed, his voice cracking.
The judge banged the gavel. "Order! Order!" But the gallery was beyond control. The Rock stood slowly towering above it all. He turned to the crowd, his deep voice carrying over the chaos.
Justice was never theirs to give. It was ours to take. Outside, the chant returned, louder than ever. "Stand tall! Stand tall! Stand tall!" The sound thundered through the streets, up the courthouse steps, shaking the walls inside. Reporters swarmed as the Rock exited, but he raised a hand, silencing even the most eager. Cameras focused tight, microphones thrust forward, millions watching live across the globe. He spoke with the calm of a mountain, the weight of truth in every word. "They shoved my face into filth. They thought it would break me. But you all saw what happened next. I rose, and I stood tall."
The crowd roared, fists pumping in rhythm with the chant. "Stand tall! Stand tall!"
The Rock's voice grew louder, sharper, every syllable hitting like a hammer.
This wasn't just my fight. It was every fight, every shove, every insult, every time someone tried to bury you. Remember this moment. Remember what happens when you refuse to stay down.
He spread his arms, embracing the roar of the people. "You stand tall!" Always. The chant became an earthquake, a living storm, drowning out sirens, traffic, even the helicopters circling above. And in the middle of it all, the racist cop was escorted out the back door in shame, hidden from cameras, his career destroyed, his name forever etched in disgrace. But the Rock's name? It was etched in something greater.
Not just in Hollywood,
Not just in wrestling, not just in the ring. In history. That night, the city lit up. Buildings projected the words "Stand Tall" across their facades. Streets echoed with celebrations. Murals blossomed overnight, and children shouted the chant as though it had always belonged to them. The Rock returned home quietly, slipping away from the lights and noise. He sat on his porch under the stars, his massive hands folded, his heart steady. For once, there were no cameras, no chants, just silence. He smiled faintly. He hadn't asked for this fight, but he had won it, not with fists, not with brute force, but with resilience. And he knew the world would never kneel the same way again.